now, based on national polling, that Joe Biden should win. Turnouts are quite high everywhere. Early voting is already more people have voted early now than they did in 2016, and we've got 8 days to go. I mean, so that they've exceeded that number. Now, part of that is pandemic-driven. Part of it is some states have moved to early voting or mail-in voting now more than they did in the past. So that might also explain it a bit. So that's where we are. I am a lot less worried about voter fraud or voter suppression than I am about voter system failure. And what I mean by that, in a state like Pennsylvania, where we have moved to what we call no excuse absentee voting. That is, you can vote absentee by mail without any excuse. You used to only be able to vote this way with an excuse. That is, you were either out of the county on the day of the election, or that you were too sick or ill to be able to show up physically to the polls. So Pennsylvania has moved into mail-in voting in a big way. We've never done it before, and I am very concerned that the volumes of people voting will put a stress on the system. They've never done this before. And I really loathe the idea that they are doing it on that a presidential race in a pandemic is the first time we're moving to mail-in voting. There were problems with this in the primary in June when the primary was, and that there were problems. I mean, with much lower volumes, that they were having problems getting these votes counted timely. I very much worry, and I hope that Pennsylvania does not become Florida of 2020. You remember Florida in 2000 with the hanging chads? I don't want Pennsylvania to be the Florida of the 2020 election. So that is an issue that we have to watch. Of course, there are concerns with the mail. As I mentioned, there's concerns that this is the first time trial run mail-in voting. There are issues too, very specific to Pennsylvania, that when you vote, you have to, by mail, you have to put your ballot in what's called the secrecy envelope that is unmarked. Then you take your secrecy envelope with a ballot in it, then you put it in the outer envelope that identifies you, and you mail that in. Well, there are going to be a number of people who are going to forget to put that ballot in the secrecy envelope. They'll just put it in the outer envelope and send it in. And they may forget to sign the outer envelope. I mean, so there are all sorts of concerns about which votes may be disqualified. And that what I just described, that the voter fails to put the ballot in the secrecy envelope and only goes to the outer envelope, that vote will be disqualified. And if there's I believe if there's no signature on the outer envelope, that vote will be disqualified. So there are concerns about by mail-in votes that people might get it wrong. And there could be a significant number. And it's good for everybody in Germany to understand that we don't have a national election in the United States. We really have 50 state elections. And so we have 50 different states that run their own elections, and the rules vary from state to state. And even from county to county in some cases, in terms of how votes are, the types of machines they use, and that sort of thing. So there's not a uniform nationalized voting system here, which helps us actually in the event if there were some intervention by the Russians or the Iranians. It would be harder for the Russians to interfere with the vote tallies, with the actual outcomes. But they could, if they were clever, they could find a way to disrupt a major county or two. They could do that. But they really couldn't. I don't think they could do it nationally, because we're just too diverse, decentralized voting system for anybody to for one source to screw the whole thing up. To interfere in that way. So those are a few things that I am watching on the ground. Also, too, in a state like Pennsylvania, and this is true in some other states, in Pennsylvania specifically, what I'm watching carefully is that in Pennsylvania you cannot. While you can vote early, your ballot will not be counted until Election Day. So in other words, whatever early votes are being sent in Pennsylvania now, they're not open. They're not being counted. Maybe they're opening, but they're certainly not counting them. Okay, they're not counting them. And that's going to create, I think, some challenges, because it'll take, I believe, several days to get a complete count. Now, we might have an idea of the outcome, but we won't have a certified count for some time, I believe. Now, the other issue too in Pennsylvania is ballots that will arrive late. The ballots are all supposed to arrive by election day. They have to be in there before the polls close. Now, the Supreme Court in the state has ruled, and the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld, that those ballots that arrive up to 3 days after the election, as long as they're postmarked on election day, will be counted. So there are issues at the of late arriving ballots, because there may be even some ballots arriving after that 3-day deadline. So keep that in mind. And just to put it in context, in Pennsylvania, again, we're doing mail-in voting really for the first time in a significant way, absentee balloting with no excuses, as we call it. Last I checked, over 2 million, I think it was 2.13 million Pennsylvanians had requested absentee ballots, that is to vote by mail. There are about 13 million residents of Pennsylvania. So that gives you a sense of how many people are voting by mail. So one final thing I'll mention, then I'll stop for your questions. This is completely campaign political conversation. I'd be happy to talk policy if you want to, but I'll stay on the campaign for a moment. Many people are talking about this idea of what they're calling a red mirage. That is, on election day, because Republicans are more apt or more likely to vote at the polls than Democrats. They'll vote in person. Those votes, at least in Pennsylvania, tend to be counted very quickly. We know the machine counts very quickly. Democrats tend to be more likely to vote by mail, and those votes will take longer to count. So you could have a situation in Pennsylvania and perhaps other states where it appears that Donald Trump is either winning or perhaps very close in the election. Polls show him down. It looks like Donald Trump is going to lose based on the polling today. But you could have a situation where it looks much closer than it actually is, or Trump could be winning on election day, only to see, that's the red mirage. Then over time, as these mail-in votes are counted, not only in Pennsylvania, but throughout the country, you'll see the shift, the blue shift, that the votes will start shifting to Biden. And of course, this, will cause Donald Trump to immediately say, oh, the system is rigged. The system is rigged, it's fixed. And so you can see the potential for post-election mayhem coming in that way. So that's just something to watch. Red mirage versus blue shift. So keep that in mind as you're watching these election returns on Tuesday evening, or in Germany, that could be Tuesday morning, or Wednesday morning, rather. You'll be watching those returns. So these are just a few things that I would watch for. And I can also then, if you want to talk about anything too, in terms of what the post-election scenario looks like, I'll give you my prediction right now. I'll give you my scenarios. It appears to me that I give Donald Trump about a 10% chance of winning re-election like he did last time, an inside straight. He kind of wins in a close election, largely with the same map he won last time. That's his best case scenario. I give that a 10% chance at best. I think it's a 30 to 40% chance that Joe Biden wins the election, in a reasonably close contest, and a 30 to 40% chance that Biden wins decisively, perhaps a blowout. And I'm starting to lean somewhere between a close Biden victory to a decisive one. I just because of the high Democratic turnouts, it leads me to believe that this could be a very strong victory for Biden. And I've said all along that I believe that the U.S. Senate will move the same way as the presidency. That's the same prediction I made in 2016. I said that the Senate, control of the Senate, would go the same way as the presidential race. Now, I thought that actually Hillary was going to win last time in Pennsylvania, and she didn't. She lost by 44,000 votes. And of course, she won the popular vote by about 2 points. So bottom line is, but the Senate went Republican when Trump won the presidency. I think the same will happen this time, that whichever party wins the presidency will control the Senate. The House of Representatives will remain Democrat, and the House will likely, the Democrats will likely pick up seats in the House. I haven't studied it that closely, but I'd say somewhere between 5 to 20 seats they'll pick up in that range. I'd probably lean towards 10 to 15 at this point. But that's kind of my sense of where we are right now. and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the election, issues, debates, whatever is on your mind. So that I'll stop and go right to your questions there. Hope that's helpful.
Okay, I'll ask the first question or two. If you want to type your questions in the chat room, and then I'll call on you one at a time. That's worked out really, really well. First of all, I want to say thanks again, Charlie, for coming to talk to us. It's one of the highlights for our German groups going to Washington every year, and this is good that now some of our American alumni get to watch as well. People also want to know about your German roots. I've had people asking if you speak German. Do you speak German?
Ja, ich spreche Deutsch ein bisschen, aber nicht gut. Ja, meine Mutter und mein Bruder sprechen Deutsch sehr gut.
That's good.
I mean, well, my German heritage is that my name is not, Dent is an English name. My mother's side, though, my middle name is Wieder, W-I-E-D-E-R, Vida. Literal translation, I guess, is again or willow, and which is not an uncommon name around here. My mother's mother, her maiden name was Rosenberger, which is a very common Mennonite name. The sect that left what is now Germany many years ago. They left in the 18th century, in the 1730s, to come here, arrived in Philadelphia. So very strong in the Pennsylvania German heritage in my region, and certainly in my family. And my mother's family is entirely Pennsylvania German. Her mother, I guess, said was a Mennonite. Her father was a German Reformed, we would call the United Church of Christ now, German, and they were obviously of German ancestry too. And even more interesting, and then I'll stop. I did my 23andMe DNA test, and it came back just as my parents said it would. I'm pleased to say, no surprises, that they hailed from these Pennsylvania Germans in my family, hailed from Rhineland-Pfalz, so the Palatinate, and some from Switzerland. Some of the Pennsylvania Germans arrived from Switzerland into Germany and over. And it was just interesting how many were from that area: Rhineland-Pfalz, North Rhineland-Westphalia, Thuringia, Saarland, and some from eastern France near the border, some from there. And then that was 47% of my ancestry, and 40% was British Irish. That's the Dent side. So there you have it.
No, that's great. And I mean, we're all impressed here as a German American institution like we are, that you helped set up the Congressional German Caucus, which is a great thing. And it's probably way too late. It should have been done a long time ago, but at least it's there now. So thanks for helping setting up that a few years ago.
Yeah, by the way, my brother and mother both lived in Germany. My mother lived there after the war. She was in the State Department, worked at the Berlin desk in West Berlin, loved it, every minute of it. She said those were the happiest days of her life. She loved every second in Berlin. And it's kind of a hurtful thing when she says that, because that was before I was born. So I realized that that was a happier occasion for her than me. She's 91 now, but she can't remember much of anything, but she can remember precise details of her time in Berlin today. I mean, I'll talk to her and she'll bring up street addresses, and it's crazy what she remembers, from 1952. Yeah.
Well, next time you're in Berlin, please do let us know and come by to visit us in the RIAS building. It's a really historic building, and it's not far from where the embassy is. So
she knows it's incredible. And my brother spent a year as an exchange student in Hamburg.
Ah, great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, the first question, people are saying some questions. The first one I wanted to ask you is your district. You were a Republican congressman from your district there. Now it's been in Democratic hands, I think, for 2 years. What happened in your district, and why did it flip from Republican to Democrat? And will it stay Democrat for a while, or will the Republicans to win it back?
Sure. Let me say right now, Donald Trump, as we speak, is in my old congressional district. He's about 4 or 5 miles from where I'm seated right now. He's here right now giving a speech at a company in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which was part of my district, Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton, the Lehigh Valley. And so he is there right now. And Hillary Clinton won this congressional district by 1 point in 2016. Actually, about half of a percentage point. As she also did the district immediately to my south in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, right between my district and Philadelphia. She won that one by about 1 point as well. So these are two key swing districts, and a lot of attention is being paid in the congressional races in both seats Lisa Scheller is the Republican. Susan Wild is the Democrat who won. Okay, in the small world category, okay, this is a true story. Susan Wild, the Democrat, her daughter and my son dated for 2 years in high school back in 2010. So I mean, you can't make this up. So so I wanted to mention that. But the district is a swing district. Local polls are suggesting, actually polls by credible pollsters, Muhlenberg College, Chris Bork. In fact, some people have visited there from Germany, founded by the leader of the Lutheran Church in America, Heinrich Melchior Muhlenberg, this school that has his name. The Muhlenberg polls say that Donald Trump is down by 7 points. Joe Biden up by 7 points in this congressional district right now. And there have been a couple other polls, Franklin and Marshall poll, as well as the DeSales University poll, all coming in with similar numbers and showing that the Democrat, Susan Wild, is ahead by about 10 points in the congressional district, in that range, 7 to 12 or 13 points is what I believe the numbers were. So very competitive, but I have to say it's advantaged Democrats right now. In fact, just some by way of history, I won this district. It's slightly changed from where it was in 2008. When I won in 2008, I won by 18 points, and Barack Obama won the district by 13 points. Hard to do that now. People are not voting for candidates as much anymore. We've moved to parliamentary style elections. People are voting for parties more than they are people. I mean, they used to say candidates matter. I'm not so sure they matter as much today as they used to.
But you yourself, I mean, I'm sure you're supporting your Republican party members there in Pennsylvania, but you were one of the Republicans to come out and say you're going to vote for Biden.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing about America. It's a free country,
Yeah.
and I'm not an elected official. I don't have responsibilities to the party. And candidly, I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2016 either. I didn't vote for him or Hillary. I wrote in somebody who was on the ballot, but not in Pennsylvania, Evan McMullen. He was on the ballot in several states, and he was running as an independent. And I wrote him in. And so really, it's a free country, and I should say I'm in good company. The former governor of Pennsylvania, Republican governor with whom I'm a good friend, Tom Ridge, he also said he's voting for Joe Biden. So is John Kasich, the former Republican governor of Ohio, and Rick Snyder, the former Republican governor of Michigan. And Snyder and Kasich just left the governor's office in 2018. So that's when they left. So they've only been out recently. So there are plenty of us, and there are others. Governor, did I hear Charlie Baker and Governor? I don't know. I know Governors Charlie Baker and Larry Hogan. Baker, Republican in Massachusetts, currently serving. Hogan in Maryland. I don't believe either of them are voting for Donald Trump either. I didn't say they're voting for Biden, but so there are a lot of folks out there, and there are plenty of other former Republican congressmen and senators like myself who've announced that they're supporting Biden.
Okay, great. We have a question from Brian Weekland. He works for MSNBC, normally in New York, but I think he's been mostly in home office in New Jersey. Brian, are you there? Go ahead.
Hi, Congressman. Thanks so much for joining us. Obviously, you just talked about how I saw your op-ed in August that you were talking about voting for Joe Biden this November. Obviously, it's because you have a lot of concerns with President Trump and his policies, what he's done in office, especially the last 4 years. I'm just curious, as a Republican, how concerned are you that President Trump has essentially taken the Republican Party down a path that perhaps it's going to face challenges over the next several years to get back to a place where the party was before President Trump ran for president and won?
A great question, Brian. Hey, just I have to note too. I'm a CNN contributor, and I have a contract, and I'm exclusive, so I can't be on MSNBC as much as I like your network, and I've been on it many times.
That's okay. That's okay. No worry. I know how it goes.
Okay. So, but let me just say this. Look, I think the Republican Party is facing a reckoning after the election. I'm assuming here for a moment that Joe Biden is going to win, and perhaps decisively. That the House and the Senate will be gone and the presidency in Biden's hands. If that is in fact the case, and like I said, I think it probably will be at this point. I think it can happen between now and Election Day, but that's what I think. There will be a reckoning, and I think there will be a few schools of thought after the election about which way the party needs to go. I can say there will be that group. I'll say people like Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz in the U.S. House who are very pro-Trump. I mean, I can see guys like them standing up after the election and saying that the reason why we lost is because we did not embrace Trump enough. We didn't hug him enough. We didn't support him enough. We didn't yell loud enough, and that's why we lost. We weren't true enough to the cause. That will be one school of thought, which I completely disagree with. There's a second school of thought will say, yes, Donald Trump is a little crazy. I didn't like him personally. I didn't like the way he carried on. He was a horrible messenger. But many of the things that he stood for, we should stand for. That's going to be another school of thought. And there's going to be a third school of thought, and I think it's going to be embraced by people like me and some others. And there might be another school, but I'm just going to leave it at three. That are going to say that the party must become much more socially tolerant and sensible, and that we have to be much more constructively engaged on the international scale, on an international scene. And finally, I would argue that the party needs to continue to embrace, free markets with, reasonable modern regulation. I'm not talking about returning to 1850 or 1925. I'm talking about modern regulation. So that's kind of what I see, and there will be a nasty fight, and we'll see, how the current leaders in Congress do, and particularly in the House. I think there could be a reckoning there that, maybe they say we need to change course, and maybe bring in new leaders. I'm not going to comment on the Senate because I'm not so sure how that will play out at this moment. But I think there's going to be a hell of a problem, and people are going to say, we really want to go down this. How do you grow a party through exclusion and subtraction and division? Donald Trump is the only president in my lifetime, who has not tried to grow his base, because most politicians understand that politics is a game of addition, not subtraction, inclusion, not exclusion, multiplication, not division. And Donald Trump has just moved in the opposite direction. And so diversity and inclusion, we have to embrace that given the demographics of the country. We have to embrace it and speak to these audiences and these constituencies in different ways, rather than, Donald Trump, Mexicans are rapists, Muslim bans, makes racially incendiary comments, in Charlottesville, and these, wacky QAnon people, kind of embracing them. I mean, so this is like really a bad direction, and and we can argue too about policy, and I'd be happy to talk about that at some point on trade. I think that the whole country is kind of turned upside down on the trade issue. If we could get into that at some point as well, but there are other areas where I think that the party's going to have to just revisit this. We did an autopsy after Romney lost to Obama in 2012. The party did an autopsy and made really very good recommendations about how to appeal to LGBT folks, or to particularly Hispanic voters. They made really good arguments, and it was widely embraced. And of course, Trump threw it all away. Now, after this 2020 election, if Republicans lose, there will be no need for an autopsy, because we will know who killed the patient. So, so that's kind of where I am. I'll stop now. Next question.
Okay, the next question is from Marilyn G-Wax. She worked for NPR in Washington, and now she's in Atlanta. Go ahead, Marilyn.
Well, hi. First, I just want to thank you, Mr. Dent. I really appreciate you talking with us today. And I'm also happy to see that maybe Georgia will no longer be the poster child for messed up elections the way things are going in Pennsylvania. It sounds rougher there.
Well, it is rough. By the way, it is rough. But I do think that your state, Georgia, is one to really watch, and particularly in the Senate. I mean, because, we might not know control of the Senate until those, you could have some runoffs, two runoffs potentially. Now, maybe our German visitors, our friends, may not be familiar with Georgia, but if no candidate for the Senate gets 50% of the vote on election day, because it's a multi-candidate field, and it's kind of like, I hate to say, it's kind of like the primary. It's a different system. But if both of those Senate candidates get under 50%, then the final election of the final two candidates in each race will be in December. Is that right?
No, January 5th.
January 5th, excuse me, January 5th. And so we might not know control of the Senate potentially until January 5th if Georgia.
If I could just describe to others why it's so peculiar here. There's the special election race where Johnny Isakson had retired for health reasons. So there's an open, unexpired term. And the people that are running for that, there's 21 candidates in that race, which is why it's so crazy. And with 21 candidates, it's virtually guaranteed that there will be a runoff on January 5th. But then the other race, which is a normal Senate seat opening, Senator Perdue, the incumbent, is facing a challenge. And it looks like both of them are just stuck at 49%, with the Libertarian getting 2%. So if they're both stuck at below 50%, they'll have a runoff in January. And with 2 seats up, that really could determine the Senate. So
Absolutely.
will money pour in? We're also sick of political ads down here, but I think we're going to get a lot more.
Oh, you're gonna, yeah. Merry Christmas. Merry
Yeah.
Christmas.
And it'll be really challenging. I mean, it could be really terrible in January. It'll be cold, and that time of year tends to be cold and rainy in Georgia. So no telling how the votes may turn out, who will show up to vote. It's a crazy time. But
It's never cold in Georgia.
well, cold by Georgian standards. It'll be a brisk 50, and that'll keep people at home. Anyway, my question for you, though, is there's an economist that I saw, so seems to be a reliable source, was tweeting on Saturday about this problem. He said he was in a suburb of Philadelphia, and he was in line with his wife to vote for 2 hours, and during the entire 2 hours, he said there were semis and pickup trucks and things circling the building, all blowing their horns and carrying Trump signs. So they may have been within whatever is the distance from the polling place, but the noise was so loud for the people standing in line that it was it was causing people to be discouraged to vote. Did that really happen? Have you heard of that happening at other? Is there?
I heard about that, but it strikes me as not a big issue. I'll tell you why. Because, like I said, Pennsylvania, we're doing absentee balloting. You vote by mail. Now, people like me, and I suspect the people you just described, were taking their ballots and they were dropping them off. I think that's what you described. And there are drop boxes at various locations. And you said this was in Philadelphia, one of the collar counties.
Suburb of Philadelphia, and it was a college professor.
What's that?
It was a college professor who said, I believe he said he was trying to early vote. Do you guys have early voting locations?
No, we don't have early voting where you can't go to a machine. You can only vote by mail.
To drop off, yeah.
Without an excuse. So you can either mail it in or we have drop boxes.
I see.
So
I think it was a drop box.
I took mine to a drop box. And when I went to the drop box at the county courthouse in my county, Lehigh County, Allentown, there was nobody there. I went there at about, it was like maybe just after 4 o'clock or 4:30. The courthouse closes at 4 o'clock, go figure. So I go in at 4:30 and it's an outdoor, there was nobody around. I just popped it in. That was just last week. I think I did it on Monday or Tuesday of or maybe it was sometime last week. I dropped it off. Now, there may be some where there's a little bit of a line, but I mean, you're literally just dropping it off. You're not actually checking any boxes. So it shouldn't take long, and the lines shouldn't be long. So, but I'm not surprised that there are people around those drop boxes, so, waving flags.
Yeah. Okay.
And they're allowed to do that. I mean, I guess it can be intimidating, but it's not illegal to stand out there and do that. So.
Are you concerned at all, though, about other, when we see what was going on with the militias in Michigan, are there concerns or any serious nature in Pennsylvania about, political disruptions of a serious nature?
No, I don't think so. There are just so many voting places on election day. Look, if you're voting by mail in Pennsylvania, kind of hard to intimidate you when you're voting by mail. You're popping in the mail or you're going to the drop box. Now, and if you go to the polling sites, and in my county, I'm guessing in Lehigh County, they're probably I'm guessing over 100 sites. I don't even know how many, but maybe over 100 polling places. Ordinarily on a presidential election, some of those lines can get pretty long. But I think the lines will be less long because so many people are voting by mail. So they'll still be a little busy. I was concerned going into the election that we might not have enough election day poll workers. That was a problem in the primary because of the pandemic. We were concerned. A lot of them, elderly people didn't want to work. Well, I'm finding out that I think we're in good shape there. So I'm not alarmed or concerned at the moment. There'll be some problems in some communities, not because of the pandemic, but because of the rules. You have to be from that particular voting district to work in that precinct, which I think is absurd and it's antiquated. But that's another issue. So long story short, I think we're going to be okay there. Now, could there be some people showing up at some polling places looking very intimidating? Absolutely. We've seen that. Look, I've seen that. You can see that with a militia type. I've seen it with some, I'll say some militant black activists, in the Philadelphia region over the years. I mean, but these are usually one-off situations. They're not pervasive. You might find one or two a few situations like that around the state, but usually nothing to be concerned with.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have, talking about voting, one of our alumni from New York, Jessica Prater, works for CNN, and she was just voting. She came to the call a bit late. She hasn't asked a question yet, but she said that New York is voting for the first time in a presidential election. Jessica, do you want to talk about your experience briefly? Are you still there?
Hey, I'm here. Yeah, this is the first time New York has early voting for a presidential election. We had it for the primaries. You could early vote, but because of coronavirus, everybody's trying to get out there early. This weekend, there were like 3-hour lines. Today, it was only about 45 minutes for me. And the line was consistently moving, and even after I left, the line was still pretty long down the block. But it went smoothly. They mail you a card like this that has a barcode on it, and they scan it. It prints out your ballot. You fill it out and scan it. So the process itself is really simple. But yeah, it's been great turnout. I've voted in New York for the past 10 years, and I've definitely never even seen lines like this on election day. So it's definitely enthusiasm out there. And I think you guys saw the pictures over the weekend where across New York and all 5 boroughs, even across the state, where there were long lines.
Yeah, well, Jessica, what area are you in at CNN, by the way?
I work for CNN News Source.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah,
Wow.
so the feed service.
Yeah, well, good. Well, I'm part of, as I mentioned, I'm part of Team CNN, a contributor, and it's the only group I'm allowed to go on the record with here on this call. But bottom line is, you're seeing, look, the turnouts, as you mentioned, Jessica, I think are very high, at least participation. When I say turnout, these early votes, like I said earlier in the call, you might not have been on when I mentioned this, but just in Pennsylvania, there were over 2 million requests for absentee ballots, which, there are 13 million people in Pennsylvania. And, that number I just quoted you was, a few weeks old. And now you can't request anymore. You're pretty much, you basically got to get you got to vote now. So that just gives you an idea of the volumes. But I am encouraged though that we might not see the usual, election day lines that we ordinarily see, just because if this number vote now, maybe we'll have less of an issue. But I'm not surprised by the New York turnouts. And New York's not even competitive. I mean, there's no question that Biden's going to New York. So, he's just going to run up the score there, at least in the popular vote, but get those electoral votes. So, interesting stuff. I'm just curious what else, other questions you all might have.
Yeah, we have another alumni, Michael Gargiulio. He's the WNBC morning anchor. He just wrote in to say he's early voting right now in Westchester County, so he can't make the call. He's one of our reliable. So it seems like a lot of enthusiasm for voting. We have a good question from Chicago. Ann Williams is one of our board members. Ann, are you out there? You want to ask your question?
Sure, I just unmuted it. And thank you so much for joining the call. So I'm just curious what you think. And it's been interesting to see. I live in a community that's pretty split, probably politically. And what's interesting is the people that are switching their votes this time and the reasons that they have. But what's interesting is a little bit of the both the enthusiasm factor that you see out in the rallies and the parades, and kind of the lack of enthusiasm on the other side, and that it's really one candidate seems to be, or one group seems to be voting for something, whereas the other one's really voting against. And that's just talking to neighbors, talking to people in the community. And believe it or not, we still probably have a 10 to 20% undecided, where people are really just thinking it through and talking about it, and where people just have coffee and are out talking on the street about that. So I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Uh-oh. She's breaking up a little bit. Dan, can you hear me?
Yes, could you hear me or no?
Oh, yeah. You went out there for a few seconds. I'm sorry. What was the actual question?
So the actual question was, what do you think of it as what it tends to be, what we're seeing in our community is whether it's more of a vote for somebody versus a vote against somebody. But like the enthusiasm factor, the people that I talk to that are voting for Trump are very excited about kind of economic policies and the law and order, which has been huge here in Chicago because it's really been hit. And the others are more voting against.
Yeah, well, I think among Trump's base that are really committed, I think the people voting for Trump, by and large, are voting for him because they like him. Now, like I said, I don't think that's enough to win, but I think many of them are very supportive. They're wearing their MAGA hats, and they're all in. And so they're voting for Trump. I would argue that many people voting for Biden are voting against Trump. And this is where I think the Democrats have to be very careful. If they win this election decisively, and I do, at the moment, I do think they will win. They should not overread that mandate. I mean, this is not a mandate for the Green New Deal. This is not a mandate for Court PAC. This is a repudiation of Donald Trump, I think, more than anything else. And that, Joe Biden is the guy who's going to steady the ship of state, and try to return us to some semblance of normalcy. I think that's what that's what I'm voting for in Joe Biden. I want some sense of normalcy. I'm not endorsing. I want him to put his foot on those guys in the far left. The Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren type, to keep them at bay. That's why we're voting for him, just to kind of bring us to something. I can deal with center left. I can't deal with his far left stuff because they're just, in my view, as reckless as Trump. The answer is a lot of the Trump supporters are voting for Trump. A lot of the Biden supporters are voting against Trump. Now, there's some who are genuinely for him, but let's face it, Joe Biden is a nice man. He's a good person. He's honorable. He's decent. It's all these things. But, he doesn't inspire the same kind of passion that maybe, say, Barack Obama did, or maybe some of the other, like a Pete Buttigieg, or some of these other younger next generation candidates. I think that's, Joe Biden is kind of seen as old establishment. And not that they don't dislike him, they just, he's old establishment and doesn't inspire, maybe the way a fresher face would. So again, like I said, they like Joe, but they're voting against Trump. Largely.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Ann, by the way, used to be connected to the Bush White House, H.W. Bush, I think, right, Ann?
Hold on. No, it was the Reagan White House.
The Reagan White House. Okay, sorry.
Wow.
So just for the record. Yeah, we've got a lot of fascinating alumni and board members. It's a great network, and we're so glad that you give us the time all the time. We have a question from an anchor woman in Germany, Geza Eberle, who was listening to the call at the beginning, but she had to go to the car repair place, and she was working, and she's going to watch the recording. But Geza, who lived in New York for a while and works for RTL, I think you mentioned this a bit, but your estimate for the absentee ballots and the Moden ballots in Pennsylvania is about a third, you were saying? You're guessing? About a third or more?
Well, I think that I should know the percentage. Yeah, I think it sounds like, so I'm going to guess, between 30 to 40% of the people are voting by absentee ballot, I think, at least that, or through the mail. that seems to be about where it is. I think I have to look at the precise number. Republicans, of course, more likely to vote in the machines, Democrats by mail, but I think the overall percentage is about that. Don't quote me on it because I haven't vetted it thoroughly, but I think that's right. About a third should vote by mail overall.
Okay, and the other question, Giza, wanted to know is, do you think that a silent majority that Trump...
Silent majority will what?
I'm trying to, questions in German. Do you think that the workers of Western Pennsylvania will once again be part of the silent majority that's going to back Trump? Do you think the industry workers in Western Pennsylvania will be part of the silent majority that backs Trump this time?
Yes, I do. I think that the Trump coalition is largely the same. And this is my critique of the Democratic Party in the country and in Pennsylvania, that one of the challenges the Democratic Party faces is this. The Democratic Party in Pennsylvania, has real challenges with industrial and agricultural America. There is a sense that the Democratic Party is at war with industrial and agricultural America. And take no further evidence of that than just a debate the other night when I think Joe Biden stumbled a bit on the issue of oil and fracking and gas and natural gas. In a state like Pennsylvania, it's the second largest natural gas producing state in the nation after Texas. It surpassed Alaska. The debate in Pennsylvania, even among the Democrats, is not whether or not we are going to frack. We frack. The question is how we do it, how we regulate it, how it's taxed. That's the issue. And I think that the vice president needs to kind of get to a better footing on that, because there are tens of thousands of workers in that industry, more in Western Pennsylvania, also some in Northeastern Pennsylvania, who take this seriously. They actually think they're part of the solution on climate change because, as we know, natural gas has half the carbon content that coal and oil do. And so they think that they're a part of the solution. And so I think the vice president needs to get to he needed a better answer than that. And so, Donald Trump is going to stoke that issue as best he can, to try to scare people in Pennsylvania. So, and then Biden's position is he's against fracking on public lands. In Pennsylvania, by the way, we have very little public land like that, very little federal lands. All the fracking here is virtually done on privately owned lands, maybe a little bit on state lands, but the federal government wouldn't control that anyway. So that's, the answer. That's a bigger issue out in the western states where the federal government owns so much of the land in Utah and Nevada, like 80% of the land in Nevada, like 75% or so in Utah. I mean, it's a bigger issue out there, but not in a state like Pennsylvania. So I think that the workers, that there's a vulnerability for Joe Biden with some of the working population, particularly the older male working population, and many without a college degree, but many of them are skilled, with skills, and I think are much more solidly in the Trump camp than in the Biden camp. And that's been reflected in a lot of the polls, although Biden has made many more inroads with that demographic than did Hillary Clinton, to be fair. So Biden is not Hillary, and Biden, I think, is going to actually lower the margin of Trump victories in those areas where Trump is strong throughout the state. That's the good news for Biden, I think, right now, is that he will do better in the areas where Hillary's vote completely collapsed. Hillary did well in Philadelphia, and the immediate suburban counties of Philadelphia did extremely well enough that she should have won, but her vote collapsed everywhere else, which was somewhat unanticipated. And Biden, I don't think, is making that same error.
What did you think when you heard Biden make the comments about phasing out natural gas and things? What do you think? And what do you think the people in Pennsylvania thought when that? Is that going to hurt him in Pennsylvania? Is that going to hurt Biden?
I winced when I saw that. I said, "Oof, just bad." It certainly doesn't help him. But I think this election narrative has already been written. The cake is largely baked. It's baked. I mean, I don't know that it's going to make. I don't think it was a big enough gaffe or an error, to change an outcome. But it certainly. He immediately went out and tried to clarify. I mean, he's against subsidies for the oil and gas industry. I mean, the better answer for Joe Biden, the answer to the question, look, even the oil companies know that they have to transition. And you just say, yes, fossil fuels are going to be part of our future for the foreseeable future. And, we hope to be less dependent upon it. But in the meantime, we're going to need to frack, to get the natural gas we need. And it's, a good transitional fuel. I mean, there's plenty of ways to answer that without getting yourself in trouble. So it's but he kind of muffed that one. So I think he is. So I think it has hurt him a little bit. Probably hurt him more in Texas, where it's, Texas is a lot closer right now than anybody would have thought. I still think Trump wins Texas, but it's going to be tight, and Biden has a shot there. But that answer might hurt him in Texas, frankly, more than even Pennsylvania.
And Gabe also asked, do you think the Democrats or the Republicans are going to win Pennsylvania?
Oh, I think are you talking the state legislature or the
congressional? No, the electoral college vote in Pennsylvania.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, well, look, if Biden wins the popular vote, he will win he'll get the electoral votes. Right. Now, there are some stories out there that if we had a contested election, if it were very close, with this whole red mirage, blue shift, and there was some contention as to whether or not the outcome was legitimate. Could the governor forward one slate of electors, and then the General Assembly, which at the moment is Republican controlled, forward an alternative slate of electors? That's a concern. That gets us into an uncharted territory. Mm-hmm. Don't know what that means. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is I don't think the Republican legislators, the leaders of the Republican in the legislature of Pennsylvania, I don't believe any of them are talking about an alternative slate. There had been some stories about that, but it seemed like the Republican leaders of the Pennsylvania General Assembly were, putting some distance between themselves and that scenario. So I am not at all convinced that doomsday outcome or scenario could occur. I guess it could, but as of now, it seems like they are trying to stay away from that. But something to think about. But whoever wins a popular vote, by rights, should get the electors.
Mm-hmm. And you see Pennsylvania shifting to blue this time? Is that your prediction?
Yeah, I think the state, again, based on the polling I'm seeing, the Real Clear Politics average has, I think, Biden up by about 6 to 8 points in that range. I haven't looked at the average. And I always said, if this race tightened to like 3 points, then I think you got pure toss-up. As I'm always discounting every poll by about 2 or 3 points. If it shows Biden's up by 8 points, I'm saying he's up by 5 or 6 points. That's that's how I'm thinking about this in the national polls and even the state polls. So I'm discounting everyone by about 2 to 3 points. So on the average, like I said, look up if somebody Googles Real Clear Politics or 538 average, I think the average right now is, I'm going to say 7 or 8 points in Pennsylvania, I think. So let's just assume it's maybe in reality 4 to 6 points.
And Hillary was also ahead in the polls in Pennsylvania at this time, wasn't she?
She was, but to be fair, look, the national polls were fairly accurate. They had Hillary winning by 3 points. She won by 2. The state polls were off, although it should be, to be fair, they were tightening a bit in those state polls going into election day. So, again, a poll only measures a particular point in time, right? So whenever they took those polls, but election day is the ultimate poll. That's the one that matters, and they were tightening, and so it was shifting clearly towards Trump in those 3 swing states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. It was clearly shifting toward him closer to the election.
You'd be surprised. Maybe you'd be surprised, maybe not, to know how much Germans are following this. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Florida. Germans know what's going on in these states in detail. So I think the Germans on the call know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, the Germans, I've observed that Germans and Europeans more generally really do pay much more attention to what's going on in other countries than Americans do. I mean, politically speaking. I mean, they really pay attention. Americans, I think, on a business level, tend to pay attention, maybe more internationally, but on the political level, not as much to the day-to-day politics about the day-to-day scrum between the parties. Germans are very good at analyzing what we're doing here. Actually, they do it pretty well.
I was on a subway in Berlin the other day, and people were talking about Pennsylvania and Ohio in real detail about who was going to win Pennsylvania and Ohio. So it was really fascinating. So Brian in New Jersey at MSNBC has another question. Go ahead, Brian, if you're still there.
Hi. Yeah, just, you served in the House as a Republican. If you've come out publicly to speak out against Trump. At MSNBC, we have Joe Scarborough consistently every morning rails against Trump. We see a lot of former politicians who no longer serve that are Republican that have come out against Trump, commentators, whatever. But I'm curious, why do you think no real sitting Republicans currently have come out against Trump? I mean, we've seen Mitt Romney to an extent, but for the most part, the representatives, senators have pretty much been in lockstep with the president and haven't dared to come out publicly and criticize him. Why do you think that is?
Survival. I think that many of them are, watching their flanks. I've said this from day one. They're more worried about primary problems that be caused if they were to really break with Trump publicly. Now you're hearing. I think that's 100% of the answer. There's no other explanation. Now, but I always said to my colleagues, I said that many of them early on, when I was in Congress there in the first 2 years of the Trump administration, I said to many of my colleagues, I said, you have to put some separation between yourself and this president. And you better do it earlier rather than later. Because, you're reading stories right now about how some Republican members of the Congress and the Senate and the House are putting some distance between themselves and Trump. Well, you really can't do that in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. You need to do it over 3 or 4 years. You can't do it. You simply can't. It's not credible. And like I said, people have already voted. The cake is baked. The narrative is written. And so you really can't. They simply aren't. It's not going to be an effective tact or tactic. So I think it was all about the primaries. And there's, the problem for that is if you're in a very safe Republican district, well, then, okay, that's a calculation you make. And if it's all you need to do is to protect your flank, you're going to win and win your general election. Well, good for you. But the problem with this, that rationale is that if you're in a more marginal district or a swing state, well, you know what? Just the pandering to your base is not going to get you a victory in the fall. And that's why some of these others, they can't get too close to Trump, or it hurts him with those moderate and swing voters. They can't get too far away from him because then they lose some of their base, and so they're in a one hell of a position. I mean, like Susan Collins, for example, in Maine. Actually, she's been very independent in many ways. I mean, she has her own brand. She has separated herself from Trump on several issues. But, it may not be enough. I might have mentioned it earlier on this call. I really don't think that people these days are voting so much for candidates. I think they're voting for parties now. I mean, it's like a parliamentary system. We're acting like a parliamentary system that people have just said, hey, I'm for Trump or against Trump, and that's how my vote's going, or I'm for Biden or against whatever. They're just simply going with that party. And like I said, like when I won my race in 2008, that was my third election for Congress. When Obama won my district by 13, and I won that same district by 18. I don't know. It's hard to outperform. Like I had to outperform John McCain significantly that year, and I did, thankfully. I wouldn't have won. It's harder to do that now than it used to be. The seat immediately to my south in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, Brian Fitzpatrick, the incumbent congressman, in a county where Trump is going to get beaten, I suspect. And the question is how badly. I think that Fitzpatrick is going to have to outperform the president by as many as it could be by 10 points to win. I think he can, but that will be the absolute exception. There won't be many people like that in this election, who can and he could still potentially lose, even though he's winning in all the polls. He could still lose. If Trump got beaten very badly there, that could still drag him down. And so that's what we're witnessing all across the country, that Republicans are in this horrible position that they can't get too close to him and they can't get too far away, depending on the district. So it's a hell of a mess. And that's what part of this reckoning is going to be about. I told my colleagues then when I was in it, in order to, look, they say, well, it's about the base, the base, the base. I said, well, you have to lead the base. If enough of us speak up, the base, the base is not monolithic. But if the base is only hearing one opinion or one voice, well, guess what? Guess where they're going to be. So that's my sense.
Okay, thanks. Maybe one last question. We can't let you slip away without asking this. There was a Politico story a week or two ago mentioning your name as being floated as a possible cabinet member in the event that Biden wins. You want to say anything about that? Any truth to that?
Yeah. Well, look, I can assure you that story was not floated by me or anyone in my family. That I do know. No, I think that was just some speculation from Politico. They're saying, hey, Biden's going to need some Republicans in the cabinet. How about Flake or Dent or Kasich or whoever they floated out there. I think that was just pure speculation. I have no plans of re-entering the government. I know that the Biden campaign, I've never spoken about this with them or them with me. They're focused on winning. I mean, and they would be foolish to have conversations like that with anybody now. I mean, they have to win. I mean, they shouldn't be measuring any drapes. They got to go run through the finish line right now. And that's what they got to do. They just got to stay on their feet and keep moving. Unlike that Giants quarterback the other day who was running and just stumbled against the Eagles in open field. I mean, and I'm an Eagles fan, so I was very happy about that. But the point is, you gotta cross the goal line here, and before you engage in a victory celebration. Like I said, I have no plans to go into government. I think it's just speculation at this time.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We're right on the hour. Unless you want to say anything else or any more questions out there, last questions, or
I'm good.
Okay.
Anybody else has anything?
Well, thanks a lot, Charlie, and we
Thank
look
you.
forward to meeting you again, and maybe in Berlin next time, and we'll take you out for a nice schnitzel and a beer.
Schnitzel and Spätzle, yeah.
Und dann können wir auf Deutsch reden.
Very good. Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, thanks everybody for joining. We've got one more talk on Wednesday, as you know, with Michigan Public Radio, Vince Dully, a RIAS alumni. And thanks for joining the call. It's another great talk, and it'll be posted on the RIAS Facebook page in about a half an hour or so. It'll be up there if you want to listen to it again. Thanks, Charlie. It was a great talk. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Charlie.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Tschüss.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Tschüss. Okay.
Tschüss.
Okay.